Let's put up a poll, Tom said. Let's ask the viewers what they want, Tom said. Surely they'll want more easy and fun listicles, Tom said. But no, they've asked for our first theory video, and now we've got to make a video about a theory that hopefully hasn't been covered extensively by others. Thanks guys, and thanks Tom, fan theories are totally something I know a lot about. And finally, books or show. We'll be using both, but I won't lie. Some points will be leaning quite a bit on show-only moments, and I've become very skeptical about what main beats D&D actually stuck with. But I do believe that some of these beats will make their way into the books when... if we ever get them. Don't worry, we'll be sure to highlight show-only moments. Before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and Discord. Here's the link if you want to come and chat. Right, let's start with the basics. What is guest right and where does it come from? The idea of guest right is that once a host has shared food and drink with their guest, the sacred law of hospitality has been invoked, and neither can harm the other while under the roof of the host. Not the literal roof, but you get the idea, basically the host's home. Traditionally, especially in the north, bread and salt are used to invoke this law. But any food or drink will invoke the law of guest right in the eyes of most of Westeros. Guest right is an extremely sacred practice in Westeros. Seriously, people do not understand just how big a deal it is that Walder Frey was willing to break it, and what he was actually risking in order to pull off the Red Wedding. Ignoring the faith-based threat of bringing the wrath of the gods down upon him, Walder was risking the very real threat of just about everyone in the kingdom who hadn't thrown in with the Lannisters, putting their differences to the side, banding together, marching on the twins, and burning it down with Walder and his kin still in it. It is that serious an offense to the people of Westeros. Think of it this way, it's such an offense to the eyes of Westeros folk that even Tywin is happy to let the phrase take credit for it. And that man's got a song sung about him obliterating an entire family line. The origins of guest right comes from a folk legend known as the Tale of the Rat Cook. You'll likely remember this tale from Bran recounting it in the show, and of course it's in the books too. Here's a quick synopsis recap of it. A cook of the Night's Watch who had been wronged by an Andal king plays host to the king and his son under the roof of the Night Fort. The cook then proceeds to serve the king a pie, but unbeknownst to the king, the pie contains the remains of his butchered son, whom the cook had murdered. As retribution for the crime of slaying a guest beneath his roof, the gods punish the cook by transforming him into a giant rat, with the ironic twist that he was unable to consume anything but his own young. The gods really did slap on a dollop of irony there, and it's this cruel irony / poetic justice embedded within the rat cook's punishment that is important to this theory. But does guest right truly anger the gods? Or is it just the wrath of men it invokes? Let's take a look at key instances of its breaking in the story and the consequences / supposed ironic punishment. And do remember, there is a difference between godly / coincidental irony and character-driven poetic justice. But again, we'll point it out if the punishment seems to be motivated by an eye for an eye style vengeance on the part of the character. Surprisingly, the very first instance of guest right being broken in A Song of Ice and Fire comes from Jaime Lannister. Yeah, I'm shocked. But he is actually the first person to violate this sacred trust in both the books and show. After breaking bread in Winterfell, he harms Bran Stark by pushing him out the window after the three-eyed useless discovers him hugging his sister. The supposed punishment from the gods is that for crippling Bran, he himself is crippled with the loss of his hand. Our first show-only example is the mutiny at Craster's Keep, instigated by Carl fucking Tanner and Rast. There might have been sawdust in the bread, but they still sealed guest right with Craster before killing him. The ironic punishment, of course, being that they turned on their brothers, and in turn their brothers turned on them. Some also say there is ironic punishment in the fact Mormont is killed by a stab in the back, and so Carl shares the same fate as his cup by being stabbed in the back. But it's not actually Carl that does this, it's Rast. Again, to be upfront, this is a show-only example, as in the books, over half the mutineers are killed by a mysterious being called Cold Hands, who was revealed to be Benjen Stark in the show. Man, Tom, I sure hope Undead Benjen has a cool badass end in the... oh, right. There isn't much irony in the mutineers' deaths in the books, and what's sad is that some of them are still alive and well from what we know. What a sickening bummer, George. I really bloody hope at least the White Walkers get them in your version. After this, we of course have the most infamous one of all that still traumatizes me to this day, the Red Wedding itself, and its three instigators, Roose Bolton, Walder Frey, and Tywin Lannister. The crossbowmen who shoot Robb when he's in a position of vulnerability are mercenaries, and while it's not outright stated, it's quite likely Tywin had some involvement in their hiring since they play the Reigns of Castamere, and we know Tywin likes to send messages. You know where I'm going with this. The ironic godly punishment is of course that Tywin is himself slain by a crossbow when also in a position of helpless vulnerability. The next two are show-only examples, but I honestly think this will be the case in the books, if maybe through different scenarios. Walder refuses Cat's offer of trading Jingle Bell for Robb's life and allows Catelyn's throat to be slit under his roof. He in turn has his throat slit by Arya Stark. The godly irony of this one is in question though, as Arya knows how her mother was killed and likely envisioned inflicting the same on Walder as a form of character-driven poetic justice. I do however think that Walder will meet the same end in the books, only it'll be Lady Stoneheart who does the slitting, not her daughter. Then there is Roose, who betrays Robb with a stab through the heart and is in turn himself betrayed by Ramsay, who stabs him in the heart, at least it looks like he's going for the heart, check, making Roose betrayed and killed by a close ally, check. Guess Catelyn was right about bastards. After this we have another show only. Well, the rest are show only now, to be honest, because we need the last two books, George! There is this scene with the Hound and Arya when they are taken in by this farmer. He offers them guest right and shares food and drink with them. The Hound then proceeds to assault him and rob him of his silver and leave him and his daughter for dead when they are vulnerable. Sandor is then himself robbed of his silver and left for dead by Arya when he is vulnerable. This moment, for the show at least, raises an interesting point, and that is the Hound is now the second person to harm but not kill his host, and he is the second person to survive his punishment. Both the Hound and Jaime clearly also act more out of necessity and desperation than pure vengeance, and while neither is a beacon of good moral values, they both clearly express regret for their actions and perform some serious acts of trying to gain redemption. Their punishments reforge them and grow their outlooks, showing us that if the gods are indeed real, they can be merciful or at the very least lenient towards remorseful guest right breakers. Over in Dorne, we have Ilaria Sand, who violates guest right by poisoning Marcella Baratheon whilst technically under Prince Doran's protection as a ward. Not sure this one really counts as breaking guest right though, and while the punishment has a cruel irony to it, like Arya avenging her family, it could once again be chalked up to Cersei wanting some poetic justice because she knows how Marcella died, making it character-driven rather than divinely driven. Plus, I just don't think this has any chance of happening in the books whatsoever, because the Sand Snakes in Ilaria are just, well, they're just better written. And finally, we have our favorite sassy grandma, the Queen of Thorns. Olenna violates guest right by poisoning Joffrey at his wedding via his wine, and she of course meets the same end via poison in wine. Now you might say, like Walder and Ilaria, this is one of the weaker cases of the god's wrath and more a case of character-driven poetic justice. But here's the thing. Although Jaime is aware of how Joffrey died, he was unaware of Olenna's part in it until she drank the poison, which, to remind you all, was a much easier vial to swallow versus the concoction Joffrey was given. Also, just as Cersei witnessed her son die in her arms helplessly, Olenna had to watch from afar as her entire family was wiped out by Cersei, also from a position of helplessness. There's definitely some godly/coincidental irony here. But this is still one of the weaker cases because Olenna wasn't the only one involved with Joffrey's death. Baelish is also complicit, and his end has no sense of irony or semblance of punishment for the Twat King's death. But then again, you might be able to reason he wasn't under Joffrey's roof at the time, he merely just supplied the goods, but then wouldn't that mean that Tywin's also immune? Yeah, this is still one of the weaker cases. Now, before we move along with this mama's farce, we must remind you all we remembered our pal Wyman Manderley. At least Tom did a couple of days after I sent him the voiceover, and in order to avoid a repeat of a certain incident involving a certain red wine fleet, insisted I address it in order to avoid our comment sections becoming flooded with comments saying, "What about Lord Manderley and his Frey pies?" Even though this is less a case of someone breaking guest right and suffering the wrath, and more of a workshop on how to have your revenge and stay clean in the eyes of the gods and the law of the land. The interesting thing about Wyman is how he seems to skirt the boundaries of breaking the rules of guest right. He's not quite bold enough to break the rule that his guest did in killing his son Wendell and the King in the North at the Red Wedding. He hosts free Freys at White Harbor, but he ends the guest right by gifting them 3 horses as they depart for Barrowtown for Ramsay and Faye Karya's wedding, as gifts can be used to end guest right. The free Freys never do make it to Barrowtown though, and mysteriously went missing. Big Manderley then rocks up at Winterfell with 3 huge pork pies and offered them to Roose and the other Freys who were currently guests at Winterfell for Ramsay's wedding. To convince them it wasn't poisonous, he ate 2 portions from each pie and is living his best life. Absolutely shit-faced, and has a disguised Mance Rayder sing about the rat cook, which, as we told you earlier, tells the tale of a prince that was killed and served to his father in a pie. Just to make this abundantly clear, one of the Freys Wyman killed was named Rhaegar. Technically, he's not killed anyone under guest right, but we do love this quote. "The best pie you have ever tasted, my lords. Wash it down with arbor gold and savor every bite. I know I shall." The balls on Wyman, no wonder he can't ride a horse. Now there are a series of murders happening in Winterfell. Mance and his spearwives take responsibility for most of them, but they deny they killed Little Walder. His death is generally attributed to Big Walder, so again, technically Wyman hasn't broken guest right, but he's absolutely riding that line. This does circle back to the consequences of the Red Wedding and breaking of guest right, by recreating the tale of the rat cook with Frey pies. At least Little Walder didn't grow up to be a Frey, hey? Again, this isn't super relevant to the theory, but the video is about guest right, and we know you guys will pull us up about it in the comments if we don't at least address it. So there, it's been addressed. But this is the clearest case of character-driven vengeance and poetic justice, and has little evidence to suggest divine or magical influence. So let's move on. So, we have 5 pretty decent cases and 3 maybes. But is this the god's intervention or just coincidence / reading too much into details? Well, before we take this further, we should actually ask a very, very, very obvious question that probably should have been addressed before anything else. And that is, do the gods of A Song of Ice and Fire even exist? Unlike a fantasy series like Lord of the Rings, where the divine are completely tangible entities that exist beyond any reasonable doubt and actually intervene quite directly within the story, the existence of the gods in A Song of Ice and Fire are a little more murky. Let's take a look at the more prominent religions that appear in the narrative and the case for their being legit. And before that guy jumps in, yes, we're well aware there's many more religions than this, but let's at least try to keep this video a digestible length, eh? The Faith of the Seven has perhaps the weakest foundation for being tangible deities. With the exception of the Stranger, who we'll address when it comes to our favorite faceless dudes, there is nothing in the lore or story to suggest that they actually exist or have intervened on anything within the story. Basically a religion built on "just trust me, bro" ideals. The biggest, most widespread religion in Westeros is the most dubious on the evidence front. I wonder if George is trying to make some sort of statement here, Tom. Next, we have the Old Gods, which draws a good chunk of its influence from paganism and druidism. The belief is the Old Gods are within everything natural, so rocks, trees, water, you get the idea. Unlike the Faith of the Seven, there are some tangible supernatural elements attributed to these deities, such as green seers, wargs, and these scary-looking trees. So at least in the realms of might not be total bollocks. After this, we have the Faceless Men, who worship the many-faced god, which has ties to the Seven, although the Faceless Men believe it's all the same god, which is the god of death, known as the Stranger to the Faith of the Seven. Like the old gods, there are some undeniable supernatural elements that get attributed to the many-faced god. You know, this face-changing shit, and the ability to cause spontaneous blindness. Then there's the Drowned God, but since when are the Ironborn right about anything, let's move on to the final faith worth discussing. Of course, the religion with the most blatant supernatural backing would end up being the one backed by the Manis, wouldn't it? Just makes too much fucking sense, doesn't it, Tom? The faith of R'hllor, better known as the Lord of Light, is the only faith that seems to really put its money where its mouth is. If a follower of this faith prays to him and makes the necessary sacrifices, he seems to respond, often quite generously. From vague, could-be coincidence moments like melting snow and killing usurper kings, all the way up to digital de-aging in real time, straight up bringing people back from the dead, and this horrific fucking thing. Even the malevolent deity of this faith has at least a case for its existence: the Great Other. Often suspected to be the divine force behind the White Walkers, seems to instill its acolytes with the power of necromancy. This is not a faith you want to fuck around with, and we'll wrap it up there. So that's the main players when it comes to religion in the world of Ice and Fire. But it still doesn't answer the question: do their gods exist? For that answer, we need to look to the author himself. George R.R. Martin makes it no secret he is a staunch atheist and conscientious objector, and this bleeds through heavily into Westeros. On top of being very anti-war, George shows us not a world of destiny and divine will, where gods lend strength and aid to the virtuous heroes who smite the wickedly evil villains. He shows us a world of chance and anarchy, where even the greatest hero with the most noble cause could be struck down because they scratched themselves on a random rock, the wound festers, and nobody nearby can treat it. The world of Ice and Fire itself is one of cruel apathy. It simply doesn't care if you're the main character or not, whether you're a lowly peasant or a king, a foot soldier in the rank and file, or the prince who was promised reborn. As Arya puts it so beautifully,
anyone can be killed.
Gods are not welcome in a world like this, and it's for this reason I would say that, no. The gods of the world of Ice and Fire do not exist. At least in my opinion, not trying to state it as fact, put the fucking pitchforks down. So, how do we explain the laws of guest right and all the signs of divinity, especially for the old gods and the Lord of Light? Well, while there's no hard evidence that there are gods in the world of Ice and Fire, magic is a tangible, proven force. It's not a common, easily accessed commodity, but there is no denying that magic exists in the world of Ice and Fire. From the birthing of Dany's dragons, the magical properties of Valyrian steel and dawn, Bran's green-seeing, the wildlings and Stark's skin-changing / warging abilities, Mel's glamoring, these bald dudes in calf, White Walker zombies, Victarion's black lava hand, and so on. Many fans speculate that all these signs of the gods' existence in the world of Ice and Fire are merely the world's inhabitants simply performing magic, and due to the supernatural implications of such powers and lack of scientific understanding of how they are brought forth, attribute such acts to the workings of the divine. So guest right and the gods' wrath must be completely bollocks, right? I mean, the gods very likely don't exist, so how can guest right be a thing? Well, bit of a bummer, but yeah. But while it's likely not the gods, there might still be something to it. Magic, as we've established, is a tangible force. It unequivocally exists in the world of Ice and Fire. Perhaps the act of guest right is actually in reality a very simple ritual that magically binds both the host and guest to one another until the pact is ended. Which is when, the guest willingly buggers off. This also makes sense when you consider those who killed their hosts were also killed, and those who only harmed their hosts were just harmed in return. It could be a binding of life force type of deal. The final reason there could still be a solid argument that guest right is a legitimate thing despite the absence of gods is the very clear irony with which the breakers were punished. Once is a coincidence and could be written off, but these ironic ends / punishments are consistent with every example we've been given in the story so far. Now, writers do love some narrative irony and poetic justice. To the writer and the reader, it's very satisfying. But this is a Song of Ice and Fire. It is purposefully written to not be poetically satisfying. It is written to be true to life. The hero doesn't win if he's stupid just because he's the hero, and the bad guys seldom get what they deserve. To build your world on the ideals of chance and anarchy, where the intention is to avoid narrative tropes, only to have every character who coincidentally broke a sacred rule to all be punished with this satisfying sense of poetic justice without it being directly linked to the breaking of said sacred rule, just feels like an oversight at best or a betrayal of the narrative spirit at worst. And I think George is far too good a writer, and I respect him far too much to believe that's the case. So yes, it seems that whether through gods or other magical forces, guest right isn't something you want to disrespect in Westeros. You make that bond and break it, it seems you have sealed your fate. But just to be that fence-sitting dickhead that I like to be, I will try and offer the means with which to debunk the idea that guest right is a thing while keeping true to the chance and anarchy spirit of the narrative. So let's start with the big one, and that is a lot of these examples are lifted from the show, and D&D aren't as careful in their writing as George's, that's just a fact. I do believe that Walder, Roose and Olenna's deaths are beats lifted from the books and will play out in a similar manner, but the rest we know for a fact don't happen and likely won't happen because of better writing. So Walder and Ilaria, I've already said, can certainly be written off as character-driven and most importantly planned poetic justice. Arya/Stoneheart and Cersei plan these punishments. People very often want their vengeance to go beyond mere pain and suffering, and very often have a little bit of "see how you like it" worked in. Olenna's death can simply be chalked up to Jaime's redemption arc. He's turned a corner, at least up until D&D said, "Hey, what a long and meaningful character arc."
And it's gone.
And painless poison is probably the most merciful means with which to kill a frail old lady in Westeros. Jaime losing his hand and becoming crippled can simply be chalked up to his value as a prisoner. Hoat wanted to send a message to Tywin and stop Roose from turning cloak, but Jaime's head is far too valuable to the Karstarks for Hoat to cut it off and mail it to the old lion. So, being the sadist he is, he opts for the next cruelest thing that actually means something significant to both Jaime and Tywin. The mutineers are hunted down because they are a monumental strategic liability to the Night's Watch if allowed to live. And, of course, treachery is often punished by those who were themselves betrayed. What are the odds that Tyrion would kill Tywin with the same weapon used to shoot Robb? Well, quite good actually. Tyrion is a dwarf, and despite the age gap, is likely to be overpowered by his father in a more close-up struggle, and likely with more noise and mess that would have alerted the guards. The crossbow is a ranged weapon that can be loaded, primed, and aimed at someone from a safe distance and activated with a simple pull of a trigger. It was the safest, logical choice for Tyrion's situation. Varys certainly seemed to think so, because it's heavily suspected he made sure it was the weapon within easiest reach, despite Tyrion having a dagger and also other options on the wall. Ramsay, despite being a sicko, is intelligent. He knows he's got one chance and one chance only to kill Roose. He played it as safe as possible and made sure his father was as close as possible and in no position to react or escape. A dagger to the heart at point-blank range was the cleanest, least messy way to accomplish this without drawing too much suspicion. And of course, the whole thing with Arya robbing the Hound and leaving him for dead could just be learned behavior. I wonder where she could have learned it from, Sandor. Do you have any ideas? And that's everything, guys, so let's open the floor up to you. Do you think there might be some magic or godly element to guest right? Or is the tale of the Rat King nothing but a scary bedtime story told to children to make sure they respect the man-made laws of hospitality? Let us know your theories and thoughts. Thanks for watching, guys.